tell me it's over now. Does a hate inside of me like some kind of master? I try to save you but I can't find the answer. I'm holding on to you, I'll never let go. I need you with me as I enter the shadows.
This is really an unusual video to make when it comes to the episodes themselves, but when it comes to the characters themselves, those are the main connection of this comparison video. Despite the plots being different from one another, Be Careful What You Fish For is really an episode that knew how to handle its characters, unlike the summer camp episode Treasure Hunt. If you remember, around the time that these episodes came out, I was considering on reviewing all the episodes, but since I wasn't in the Loud House mood back then, honestly, it's really for the best, because out of all the summer camp episodes, Treasure Hunt is really the weakest episode throughout the entire summer camp arc, and it barely feels like a summer camp episode, but more on that later. Be Careful What You Fish For centers around Leonard desperately trying to get Moby Wick, who is a fish that he desperately wants to capture, while also having family bonding with two of his families. In Treasure Hunt, Lincoln found a pirate flag, which is the Jolly Roger, and he uses it to place it on top of his cabin, which led to the summoning of the antagonists of this episode. But this is supposed to be Captain Kit, the same person who hidden his treasure in the woods of Camp Macedon, and also having a pirate flag while hitting it in the process, which there was so many retcons in this episode due to the fact that they never do their own research on their own episodes, since that Camped was a season 5 episode that is around the time where they're doing a different direction for this show, which really shows to me that they're not taking their own direction seriously. Let's get into the examples of Be Careful What You Fish For has the characters being aware of the situation. Now, as much as I understand that the entire plot point has been done before, specifically Jimmy Neutron did an episode where it centers around the characters being on a boat while a fish is nearby. Granted, it was mostly a turtle, but at the same time, it's still something centering around the ocean. You can tell for a fact that they really wanted to showcase Leonard's character development when it comes to him being a fisherman. And when it comes to him shining in this episode, this is a good example of making a character, specifically Leonard, something that you really want to root for, but at the same time, the family is really important when it comes to them being in danger. For Treasure Hunt, on the other hand, it's supposed to be a sequel to Camped when it comes to Captain Kit, but on the other hand, he is still not a pirate. And after watching the entire episode of Camped again, there was not one word mentioned that he was a pirate. He may have taken treasure, and he is still called Captain Kit, but on the other hand, this is what Captain Kit looks like in Camped. He doesn't have an octopus as a sidekick, he has a parrot, and the boat in this, even if it's supposed to be a spare boat, I have to admit that if we see his actual big boat, it would have nothing to do with pirates whatsoever, and the flag on the boat itself has nothing to do with pirates related. And when it comes to him getting treasure, honestly, if they had the antagonists of Treasure Hunt be a different pirate rather than Captain Kit, then I would say for a fact that it would have saved most of the episode's problems. But looking at Captain Kit here and looking at it in Treasure Hunt, it's supposed to be the indication that reality is really disappointed than what you see in history books. But regardless if that is true or not, the fact that we see a picture of him in the book itself from Camped, and we're supposed to believe that anything that we've seen involving the history of Captain Kit is basically mostly an afterthought, and the fact that the wooden bolts of his boat isn't really what we've seen in Treasure Hunt, and it really makes the treasure map really complicated to think about. To think that he would allow someone to search for his treasure for the sake of him attempting to win it back. Honestly, this just proves to me that they really retcon Captain Kit, despite the fact that it's supposed to follow the details of Camped when it comes to having a treasure map. And before you asked, yes, I'm fully aware that there were fantasy elements in Camped to where it's believable for some material to be magical in Camp Mastodon, but at the same time, you really can't expect me to believe that Captain Kit has a pirate flag hidden outside of the caves. Like, the most logical way for him to do a stunt like this is probably hit the pirate flag in the same veins as hiding his treasure in the cave. Honestly, I do have more questions to think about the logic of fantasy elements in this location, but at the same time, the idea of being a pirate flag as an ancient artifact, it's not believable. Here was another retcon in this episode. When Clyde looked at the flag closely, he stated that it's 400 years old, which, if you remembered Camped, the storm of 1913 is where Captain Kit hidden the treasure. So, for me personally, I don't even think that Captain Kit has any enemies when it comes to pirates, because if there were enemies of his own centering around pirates, then I'm pretty sure that he would have been born a long time ago. When they show Leonard's backstory in Be Careful What You Fish For, do you seriously expect me to believe that it happened centuries ago? No. If anything, the great-great-great-grandson of Leonard will probably have a difficult time processing on keeping the family heritage when it comes to seek revenge on the fish that destroyed or killed his grandfathers, to the point that I'm pretty sure that Moby Dick wouldn't be around if he was born nearly centuries ago. Plus, during the final minutes of this episode, well, Leonard goes out of his way to seek revenge against Moby Dick, and we see the characters go through a waterfall. Honestly, for how this episode is structured from beginning to end, it was earned, and the pacing really makes it worthwhile, but the pacing in Treasure Hunt is bad, to the point that there was not enough time to have any process on the zombified form of Captain Kit, to the point that putting the idea that being a zombie, which makes you completely different than how you were back then, doesn't really excuse on the fact that the pirate flag is the reason onto why it summoned Captain Kit from the underworld. It would have happened to a different pirate that would have suited this much more better, but since that it's Captain Kit, really there's more reasons onto why that Lincoln causing the problem really sums up a lot that I can't be able to take this episode seriously, especially as a camp episode. Let's get Lucy out of the way, because regardless of her warning Lincoln about what's going to happen when it comes to them having the pirate flag hang up and he ignored her warning, I'm sorry, but I still do not like Lucy in this episode due to the fact that she is being put in a high pedestal due to her intelligence of supernatural material. Like, this did happen in previous episodes, but in a camping episode, it feels out of place. Ignoring the Morticia's Club, looking at Lucy's character on her own when it comes to her casting spells and being an expert on stuff like this, I'm not buying it. Like, it's one thing that she has something better than the other characters, other than poems, but on the other hand, you really can't expect me to believe that she's the character who would say scary stories, because regardless if this is the 4th or 5th time while her family are getting themselves into a fantasy element situation, it doesn't change the fact that all this taking place in a camp just feels out of nowhere. Like, in other materials when it comes to her casting spells or supernatural stuff happening, I can say for a fact that it was somewhat believable. But here, due to the retcons, Lucy warning Lincoln really doesn't feel believable in a way to prevent harm's way, because the fact that they're making Lincoln a mischievous kid in these scenarios, I'm not believing that at all, to the point that it's just too difficult to be convinced that he would cause trouble for his own playful manner, to well that it just makes you question onto what he's supposed to do and what not supposed to do when it comes to camp. Because with the pirate flag being close to the campgrounds, if that happened far away from camp and Lincoln manages to find it, maybe I would probably see where Lucy is coming from. But on the other hand, the fact that she knows this stuff while the others don't think like her, they're literally showcasing of why the fantasy elements don't work well. Every single character aside from Lucy isn't giving in on the consequences and disaster that would happen to them when it comes to them messing with ancient artifacts. Look, I'm not saying that I hate Lucy by having her do fantasy elements material, specifically her summoning ghosts. But on the other hand, if that's literally the only character you can only give towards when it comes to exclusive material in the same ways as Lisa into science and whatnot, then that's another problem onto why that the fantasy elements aren't working for the other characters. Like, I would say for a fact that if Lucy attempted to have the other characters learn and understand the consequences when it comes to having ancient artifacts and whatnot, I would say that she will probably do a service for her family by having her family prevent having any ancient artifacts or doing something for their own benefit. Like, that's pretty much the examples onto why that me not being able to enjoy Lucy in these episodes don't work well. She is the only one understanding it while her family doesn't. Besides, this episode doesn't allow Lucy to do more than give Lincoln a warning or exposition. It just gives me the idea that they're only using her for a plot point by making some of this stuff work for the story. And due to the retcons, it just really makes her an afterthought, which is something that she really hates being when it comes to being overlooked. But in all seriousness, type of stuff like this doesn't work for Lucy's character, and it's not making her likable. Really, the cast in Be Careful What You Fish For, Shallow, Lance, Lincoln, Lynn Sr., and Gramps, which is Leonard, really have better execution with them having less knowledge and just basically doing the duties of Leonard in order to get Moby Wick. Like, it's one thing if you want to have multiple characters with different personalities to make the plot work, but with how these characters are actually working together in a way, well, they're on the same team goes to show that they actually knew how to handle these characters and the personalities way more than basically anything in Treasure Hunt. Shallow, despite not doing much in this episode, is literally the same formula of what Lin was doing in Treasure Hunt despite having less screen time, because as far as I'm concerned, the fact that Shallow is actually brave in this episode in some other way, well, aside from the waterfall situation, says a lot that Lin Jr. is supposed to be a more braver and stronger character. It's difficult to believe, but in Season 9, they did an episode centering around Lin Jr. being competitive towards Shallow, and it does show a lot of Lin Jr.'s strength. Remember that fan art I posted yesterday? Well, Lin Jr. can lift the entire pirate ship up with her arms. Well, that should have been the ending, which would have made Lin Jr. the savior of the camp, despite the fact that her brother caused the crisis. But my point is that they've shown Lin Jr.'s strength so many times throughout the series to the point that I can easily accept that. In her and Shallow's episode, she lifted the entire Loud House with just one of her arms. Yeah, you are not seeing things differently. This has actually happened in the Season 9 episode, and it's for the proof that though dumbing her character down for the sake of having Lincoln being the hero, but that's also another problem of its own. When Captain Kidd risen his boat from the ocean and the underworld, she becomes scared and weak, which sums up a lot that they're making her character weaker and dumber, despite the fact that she is proven time and time again that she is stronger, and it just makes me convinced that though having the feel of fancy elements, which sums up a lot of how she was portrayed in Naughty or Nice by not fighting back any of the naughty people, and the doing the heel when it comes to underworld pirate. And as far as I'm concerned, this really affected Lin Jr.'s character to the point that she is really not cooperable when it comes to fancy elements, in the same veins as Lincoln. If we're ever going to have an episode where Shallow and his family experience something fancy elements in some other way, they could show Shallow as being more competitive against that type of stuff than Lin Jr. Seriously, none of this is convincing me that it's a flaw in Lin Jr.'s character, because if it were, she would have only used her strength for ego, but also for defense, because if she can use her strength for self-defense, then I can easily say for a fact that it would make me see her character better, and not having that as a flaw when it comes to not using her strength for defense would make me see her character a little better. But instead, it makes me see that she probably has nightmares when it comes to evil elves and evil pirates from the underworld. Isn't it just me, or did Lance teach Shallow on being a more braver kid? Because I'm pretty sure that Lin Sr. didn't do the same for Lin Jr. or Rita in that case. For Leonard, he is the MVP in Be Careful What You Fish For. Terrell, that you can see his bravery when it comes to him being a fisherman and hunting down Moby Wick, who really haunt him to the point that it really makes the haunting in this episode to a character more believable than the haunting from Treasure Hunt, which is ironic considering that the Season 10 episode has the word haunt in the episode title. With him abandoning Shallow, Lance, Lin Sr., and Lincoln in order to capture Moby Wick is always a relatable scenario when it comes to fishermen dealing with fishes that haunted them in their sleep. So Seeing him trying to accomplish his goal while putting the other characters in harm's way is somewhat similar to Lincoln putting the other characters in harm's way in Treasure Hunt. But on the other hand, since it was all grounded to the point that him attempting to capture the fish is believable, really, if anyone was in his position, they would probably have regrets and instantly showcase of what is really important to the point that it feels earned. Here's the thing when it comes to animal characters being corruptible towards the human characters. It just kind of feels a little too outlandish, but in comparison to the octopus from Treasure Hunt, honestly, it made me see that Moby Wick, while not being as threatening when it comes to how he was described in the point of view of Leonard, him helping out the family towards the end does feel earned. Granted, it does feel a little awkward thinking about it, but if it's not too bad due to how good the writing is, it's forgivable. Even though it takes away the serious scenarios of predators on land and ocean, it doesn't really change the fact that they at least attempted to make this earned when Moby Wick just feels like a fish character that isn't really as threatening due to what we've learned upon seeing him on screen towards the end of this episode. And truth be told, if Leonard attempted to save 2 of his families, he wouldn't be able to succeed. He can't be able to succeed on his own when it comes to pulling the boat, all the while getting there on time. Really, the 2 Loud families wouldn't even have a chance on surviving the waterfall. Like, you are gonna make me convinced that if Leonard had a different strategy, it would be too late, and the stakes here are way more extreme, and it was earned in comparison to Treasure Hunt. For Leonard taking over Camp Macedon in the Season 6 episode, Bummer Camp, I get it. It's not easy for him to run a camp, but after sitting through Bummer Camp, it does show to me that he has potential on making things right on continuing tradition of continuing Camp Macedon before it got shut down if Lincoln's family didn't arrive at Camp Macedon. But on the other hand, the fact that he doesn't really do much in the summer camp arc other than helping out the other characters in serious situations, they really dropped the ball on making another Leonard episode when it comes to the summer camp arc, and when it comes to how he was portrayed in the Treasure Hunt episode, he still doesn't have experience. Like, I would have given him slack when it comes to the whole pirate situation, since that he's not familiar with it, but if you're meaning to tell me that he isn't braver to take down the pirate ship, then it just makes me believe that his bravery is literally fisherman material, which, regardless if it had nothing to do with searching for treasure, it's still the same thing as going through dangerous underwater predators that would give you more experience and more bravery against something, while it may not be similar to those, can still give you the advantage on attempting to take down the pirate enemy. The motivation that Leonard does in this episode is not only keeping the treasure away from Captain Kit, but he's also dealing with financial problems on keeping the camp running. The fact that we didn't have that as the final episode of this summer camp arc really shows to me that they can't be able to make the stakes work in this capacity due to the retcons, and truth be told, it's worth speculation that the camp itself is still running after Lincoln and his family left. Like I said in my Villains and Antagonists episode when I talked about Lincoln's antagonists in Ticked Off, this would have been better off if the majority of the season, or the entirety of the season, had the characters stay at Camp Macedon throughout the entire summer, because This really feels like a week of what they've done in camp, or less than that, to the point that it just makes it difficult to believe of what they've been doing the entire time during the summer, to well that we just barely learn more about Camp Macedon, or having entertaining episodes that would have benefited these characters in a scenario of them being in camp. And that's honestly what makes this more disappointing on the fact that, like the Europe World Trip arc, when it only has 5 episodes, the Summer Camp arc only has 5 episodes. Now let's get into Lincoln's character in this. I've seen tweets involving how stupid he was when it comes to doing these decisions, especially the ending. And thinking about it more only just gets me more irritated and frustrated on the fact that you can't be able to write Lincoln good when it comes to these types of storylines when you have his character dumbed down for the plot to work, along with the other characters having different directions that don't suit their characters, by making this plot to work for the plot's favor. That's basically what I'm stating, is that stuff like this is only like this for the plot's favor. This episode never convinced me that Lincoln was a mischievous kid. No, not even close, because you really expect me to believe that ignoring the retcons and just accepting that Captain Kit is this way rather than his original design from Camped is enough for me to see Lincoln in the wrong. May I remind you that all this is still taking place at a camp, and Lincoln is just doing what the other kids are doing by having fun. And even though that the pirate flag is a red flag that he shouldn't have any involvement whatsoever with how that this episode was functioned and how it was structured, it would have made sense if Captain Kit was not a pirate or that, and it was just a different character, specifically Captain Kit's original antagonists, because the ideal of him causing trouble because he intended to do it, really, if he actually had knowledge of supernatural material or fantasy elements like Lucy, then maybe he would have had second thoughts. But on the other hand, the type of material that he comes across is always different from one another, to the point that the pirate flag is really the lowest materials of ideal that it's considered an ancient artifact, because I am never going to believe that a flag can risen the dead of a pirate, when in reality Lincoln is just only doing it because he just wants to have a flag attached to his cabin. And even if people are not going to agree with me on this, having flags outside of your cabin is something that cabins usually do when the campers have the flags being risen up. Now, granted, Lincoln didn't create the pirate's flag, but on the other hand, if Camp Macedon doesn't have the budget to allow campers create their own flags, really the fun nature of what Lincoln is doing is acting like he's a pirate by having a pirate's flag being lifted up, and thinking of how that's something that kids usually do, and Lincoln is actually into camping when it comes to enjoying himself, really? Do you honestly expect me to believe that he attended for other people to get harmed? It's not believable. Like, I didn't have a difficult time finding flags hanging above cabins when it comes to campgrounds, but on the other hand, if you are mostly convinced that what Lincoln did is bad, you're also missing the point of what he did is still considered a camping activity, which is something that Treasure Hunt lacks. Plus, no matter how you look at it, the pirate's flag or the Jolly Roger is too close to the campgrounds, and it's not really hitting better in comparison to the other stuff that was hitting in other locations that Lincoln and the other characters have came across. As much as I still didn't like Bizarratorium, it still feels like that they're preventing anything bad happening from the inside of the building where the Wayne was located. And considering that Lincoln got the Wayne due to the door not being barricaded enough, it still feels believable of what he caused in comparison to what he caused in Treasure Hunt. While Bizarratorium attempted to be its own thing when it comes to the location and items, the stuff that they did in this episode isn't meant to be its own thing, well, it's a continuation from the camped episode. And with the retcons that it made, you really can't make me convinced that Captain Kit is willing to go to shore to find his booty from the same location that he left it. Because if it happened somewhere else, that someone else took it, then he will probably have a better chance on taking advantage against those people, knowing full well that they will probably be in the same predicament as Lincoln was in this episode. It's one thing that you want to have the characters not take something that doesn't belong to them, but on the other hand, when it's all taking place in camp, not to mention close to the campgrounds, and not being completely hidden like Captain Kit's treasure, they're doing this on purpose to have this episode be a parody of Pirates of the Caribbean. And truth be told, I still wouldn't be able to enjoy the Pirates material in this if I was a fan of that franchise. Like, the closest connection of this episode when it comes to Lincoln being into pirates is him having a pirate battle with CJ from Relative Chaos from Season 2. And I would think about this more on the idea of Lincoln is into pirates, but on the other hand, since that only happened once, it's difficult to take it at face value in Treasure Hunt. Really, if they wanted to do a plot of Lincoln breaking the rules by taking something that doesn't belong to him, it would have happened from a different location close to Camp Macedon. Specifically, a different camp, and it leads to a crisis that feels accurate. Like, as much as I understand that it may be difficult to believe, if the flag itself wasn't close to the Camp Macedon campgrounds, then I would probably think that this type of punishment that Lincoln got due to his actions is more justified than a pirate flag that really has no resemblance of Captain Kit's character from the camped episode. You can't convince me that he's going to learn stuff the hard way without having any knowledge of underworld material that he caused, all the while understanding the enemy that he's facing off. And with him thinking that the pirate flag belongs to Captain Kit, after having the idea that he has hidden a treasure map in camped, truth be told, if there was a different captain or pirate that hidden something in the same location in Camp Macedon, which is also closer to the campgrounds, that's going to be difficult for me to believe, knowing full well that they have a poor setup in order to make an episode work like this. Like, Lincoln in this episode, if he was doing this for his own benefit while causing chaos, he would enjoy being a pirate like Captain Kit, but truth be told, he isn't. And the inconsistency that he does, other than the ending, is his bravery when he faces off Captain Kit in a sword fight by whipping his arm off. The thing is that it's been shown that Lincoln and Clyde are afraid of Captain Kit, and this just feels phoned in for the sake of having a battle between Captain Kit and Lincoln to, well, if this episode was longer than 11 minutes, then it would have had execution on making Lincoln braver against a threat that is supposed to be menacing against him. So, the ideal of it is there, but on the other hand, it still showcases the inconsistency of Lincoln's character on being afraid while also being brave while getting on the pirate ship, all the while that all this doesn't feel earned. In the same ways as the battle and scenarios that the characters went through in Naughty or Nice, this also wasn't earned. If you really thought that I was only focusing on Lincoln's family and not Tim, I'm also focusing on him in these types of scenarios as well. Let's go back to be careful what you fish for when it comes to how Lincoln was handled in that episode. Despite having the same roles as the other characters aside from Leonard on staying on the boat, at the very least, he was happy, like in Treasure Hunt in the beginning, but on the other hand, the stakes, he was fully aware of it when it comes to the waterfall itself, and thinking of how that he would have handled the situation on his own, it's really not believable when it comes to him not being into fisherman material. So it's a first for him, and with him being into pirates material when it comes to Treasure Hunt on placing the pirate flag on top of his cabin, it would have been fleshed out, but due to the short runtime, everything has to be rushed for the sake of the episode to work out, and sums up a lot that anyone would do what Lincoln did in Treasure Hunt. Like, with those items close to the campgrounds and not in faraway places, it's honestly difficult to believe that an incident like that won't happen again when the Louds family leaves, and with how fantasy elements functioned in that episode, that just sums up a lot that they would probably have no way to stop the pirate ship or Captain Kidd or basically any other underworld character that they're gonna have competition against, knowing full well that it's gonna be difficult for the odds against them. And that would probably be a difficult task for Lincoln to handle, and with him handling that responsibility is still unfair, regardless of him causing it. Though making Lincoln, Timmy, Jimmy, and some characters from Nicktoons in the formula of causing a conflict while fixing it at the end of the episode, and it does not work in this. It may work when it comes to the other elements that have nothing to do with fantasy elements and supernatural material, but in episodes like this, you can't convince me that anything is possible for Lincoln to do this. Like, he did found a way to take down the pirate ship and Captain Kidd, but with how the logic works in this for fantasy elements, honestly, I can't really blame him for not understanding more of how magic functions and how he has to handle the situation on his own when the stakes are so unnecessarily big. The whole idea of Lincoln being a mischievous kid is just too phoned in to where it makes no sense. Like, for his own selfish ways, it just makes me to believe that they can't be able to have a conflict work without having a main character, specifically Lincoln, causing something, because no other character would do it, and the only way for a conflict to work is to have your main characters do it and do stupid ways in order to make the conflict work when it comes to fantasy elements that this show barely does a good job at. When the other characters cause something terribly in other episodes, it's really difficult to buy in, but with how that they build it up for episodes centering around Lincoln, it wasn't owned whatsoever. And looking back, they somehow managed to make it work, but on the other hand, just because that they're gonna do it with other characters doesn't mean that it's going to work for them. Besides, it just always makes me think that the idea of including fantasy elements in this is a way of just doing something bigger, when in reality they're not relying on their own characters to carry the story to the point that it would have made it more worthwhile than just including fantasy elements that is supposed to be bigger and better. Having Lincoln saying doom and gloom to Lucy is supposed to make him unlikable, but on the other hand, that just makes it really difficult to take the situation seriously with how rushed the episode is, to where it's kind of difficult to think that having a pirate flag is the cause of a pirate risen from the underworld. There's no way you can convince me for that to work if that person was Captain Kit. That just sums up a lot that any of this just doesn't really work, and with all this being a summer camp episode, this just goes against what summer camp episodes are supposed to be. Having the characters enjoy themselves, and what Lincoln did in this episode is unusual, but at the same time, finding a pirate's flag still feels unusual. Like, if they really wanted Lucy to do something in this summer camp arc, have her and Lincoln be the main characters. And when it comes to causing the conflict, Lucy teaches Lincoln about the consequences of what could really happen. And truth be told, the fact that Lucy doesn't do much in this episode after Lincoln denies her request or demand on taking the flag down, these characters are far apart that they shouldn't, and the fact that they're in the campgrounds just makes it even more worse. The only material involving camping in this episode is arts and crafts. Well, Lola makes fake treasure in order to keep the real treasure from Captain Kidd, and Lola is really the best character in this episode. And considering I didn't enjoy her in other episodes, the fact that she is one of the only Loud Sisters that didn't scold Lincoln for causing the conflict, especially almost causing the conflict again at the end of the episode. It's really bizarre seeing Lola, the only nice sister to Lincoln, in this arc. Granted, it's probably the fact that she is not into pirates, despite being afraid of Captain Kidd in the cafeteria. But I would take that than having her join the bandwagon of blaming Lincoln for everything, which is something that she did in Bizarratorium. For the other camping material, Lincoln was doing archery in the beginning and he has a difficult time aiming. And then later on, that comes into play once he uses the cannonball to aim at the Jolly Roger by destroying it. Again, this will have been earned, but at the same time, due to the pirate stuff getting in the way in the retcons, honestly, Lincoln being into aiming while learning from aiming isn't going to get him anywhere in life due to how the episode was structured. Like, it's supposed to be a smart move on his part when it comes to him learning about aiming, but the fact that there was little screen time of that, with the majority of it centering around the whole pirate fiasco, then I don't even know if this was really something important for Lincoln, if he's never going to do aiming like that ever again. And it doesn't really showcase Lincoln's bravery more, knowing how he's also flip-flopping on being afraid of Captain Kidd, but at the same time taking the risk of saving everyone. That just sums up a lot that this entire material just doesn't work for him. In the same veins of him doing all of the work and be careful what you fish for, which will lead to huge sacrifices on the other characters. And truth be told, having more questions on more artifacts being surrounded in the location of Camp Macedon, or at least close by, why can't these characters just destroy them? Like, ignoring the fact that Clyde mentioned earlier that they can use the pirate flag to be placed in a museum, I would say for a fact that something bad could happen if someone took those artifacts, and this isn't convincing me that these artifacts are Indiana Jones artifacts if they're that easy to find in a location like Camp Macedon. Not to mention that the ending of this episode is also rushed. Well, after escaping the pirate ship from sinking, we just get this joke of having Lincoln having an artifact and not thinking clearly. That's how much that the pacing is so bad, that everything is so rushed, that there isn't time to breathe, to the point that it's convincing me that this episode isn't allowing Lincoln to have an opinion whatsoever on fantasy elements or anything that he touches or keeps. That just sums up a lot that if he actually remembered, then I'm pretty sure that he would have had paranoia, but really, I'm pretty sure that he has no fears of Captain Kidd and his octopus after this episode, knowing full well that this show isn't even bothering on having the characters have feels in any other way, despite the fact that there was an episode where Lincoln and Clyde have the phobias get the better of them to the point that people will complain about it, which is something that was against their characters, which, as much as I did a fanfic based off the phobias, I can understand where they're coming from, but I would probably be afraid of doing any of this in the same veins of literally switching the nice and naughty lists in naughty or nice. Like, they're not allowing Lincoln to feel anything when it comes to fantasy elements or anything else when it comes to consequences involving that, to well, why should I go against him if none of this is being focused on or having any form of consequences on the characters on how they feel about them. This is why I do not take Lincoln taking responsibility for what he caused rather than just running away and making the proper remorse for everyone, because it never made him a hero, and with how you factor in on how that all this just doesn't make any sense to the point that this episode just feels the odd one out of the summer camp arc, you're better off skipping this episode while continuing on with the summer camp arc with Brawl of the Wild. It may not be the best ending to this arc, but at the same time, these episodes are still camp material than anything that Treasure Hunt offered. Like, the idea of doing a season of the characters spending the summer at camp is, again, not a bad idea. If anything, it would have benefited Treasure Hunt a little bit more if it was a 22-minute episode rather than an 11-minute episode where they have to cram in everything in order to make it work. And with so many missed opportunities of having the other characters not getting the spotlight, you always look at this and just assume that they're only doing this for the sake of having another arc rather than just being enjoyable with it. Because summer camp material can work and it can be enjoyable if you have those characters be in this environment. And I actually think that the loud characters can benefit from it more to while you would see the good of what they can do with it. Granted, the episodes themselves aren't the best, but on the other hand, they're still worth sitting through than Treasure Hunt. I like Lori's episode, and the idea of having Lynn and Lisa having an episode together while Lisa wants to stay inside of her cabin is similar to the snow episode from season 1. I can take it more than fantasy elements or even science elements get involved, since that Lisa didn't do any science material whatsoever in her episode with Lynn Jr. Now, she did have things with her, but at the same time, it's not scientifically machinery, as in machines that she can use to protect herself. She used a bubble to keep herself from germs, but on the other hand, she didn't do any technology whatsoever. Really, if I expected these episodes to be more than just camping episodes, I would have been a hypocrite and prefer Treasure Hunt as the superior summer camp episode, but it's not really a summer camp episode with less summer camp material, and with the majority of it, specifically 85% of it, centers around underworld material and a lot of retcons. That just sums up a lot that me not doing an anthology video of reviewing all the episodes of the summer camp arc is really for the best. And while I didn't talk about be careful what you fish for a lot while comparing it to Treasure Hunt, the examples of it is a showcase that a boat episode can do better than just a pirate episode. Well, in all honesty, with the characters spending most of the time in the water and we just witness a pirate ship next to camp, honestly, they're not really doing any favors on making those episodes work in favor of episodes like this that attempted to make everything right. Like, at this point, be careful what you fish for is a definition of what an episode could do for a camping episode if the characters leave Camp Macedon in order to do fishing material, but also having the fisherman material worked into a camping episode, since that Leonard will benefit more on carrying the episode in the same ways that he did in Be Careful What You Fish For. If they really wanted to do an episode where Captain Kit returns from the dead by using the fancy elements, this isn't it. And at this point, I'm getting sick and tired of seeing people witnessing this episode as being its own thing, and regardless if some of them are the newer fans of the franchise, if they don't pick up the details, then someone else would. And for me personally, I picked up the details myself to where this episode just really feels like the anti-summer camp episode out of this entire arc. Truth be told, I'm just glad that I finally talked about this episode. I was thinking of saving this episode by doing the fancy elements video, but in all honesty, those ideas could be little due to the moods that I'm in. Granted, it's debatable if it can happen or not, but I've been thinking about this episode too much in comparison to the other fancy elements episodes to where it's difficult to overlook it, to where it just makes you think more and more of what this episode caused when it comes to the retcons and making the characters dumbed down for the sake of plot. I'm gonna have a difficult time of how the fancy elements aren't doing the characters favors, since I've already mentioned Lin Jr., but I would have to look into how the characters react into these situations, because literally the only character that really feels accurate to these types of situations is Sergio from the episode Cursed. Honestly, the more I think about how the Casagrandes cause the havoc in Great Lakes Freakout is really more up for debate. But I wouldn't prefer that over the grounded material involving the Loud House episodes. Like, you can be outlandish if it's done right. And while being outlandish by including fancy elements won't work together if you have proper writing to make it work, which Treasure Hunt lacks. So with that being said, I'm giving Be Careful What You Fish For an 8.5 out of 10, while Treasure Hunt gets a 2.5 out of 10. These Cartoon Crisis 3 intro and outros won't go anywhere if I tackle more Loud House material. And Time Trap could be next in line.
I'll never let go.